Welcome to the Last Place podcast, where winning doesn't matter. This is episode 2. I am Jonathan Cox from the John Gets Games YouTube channel, and with me I have...
Efka from No Pun Included.
And today we want to talk about the Colonists, in particular because we have both played this epic game of strategy, as it says on the box.
Oh my god.
We've got quite a bit to say. So, Efka, just yesterday, you played this for how long?
11 hours, John. I have played it for 11 hours.
That is probably longer than you should have been playing this game for.
I think it's probably longer than anyone should ever play a board game for, but we did it anyway.
For a little bit of context here, this is, it's certainly a strategy game, and it's split up into 4 eras. And it's kind of a choose your own duration game. You could choose how many of these eras you want to play. When I played it, it was a 3-player game, and we only played eras 1, 2, and 3. However, you are crazy, and what did you do?
We played eras 1, 2, 3, and 4 with 4 players, which is the maximum player count.
So this game probably cannot actually go longer than what you did for new players playing the game in its longest entirety. Let's just cut to the chase. Did you enjoy your 11 hours?
I don't even know where to begin. I think time ceased existing and there was only the Colonists. It was interesting, certainly. The reason we went into the full thing of 4 eras was because we wanted to get together for a long game day, and it said, hey, epic strategy board game on the box. And we thought, hey, let's experience this epic thing in its full glory. So we did, especially because we had time to do it. We had set aside a day and we thought, you know what, let's do this. Let's have fun. And it was interesting. I think the Colonists does what Twilight Imperium has done for the American-style game players and what Mega Civilizations has done for the war gamers. You know, this is the Eurogame version of that, the really, really big, epic game. And correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing really in the Eurogame zone that does what the Colonists does in a way.
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I mean, of course, there are 18xx games that are, famous for, a short 18xx game is like 6 hours. But I don't know if you would call those Euros. I mean, there's lots of stock market. I guess it is those are a Euro style game, but they're almost their own thing to a certain point where I would not. Like, people usually are like, they really love that one style of game, but there are no, you're not laying track, you're not picking up goods, you're not delivering them. What you're doing in this game is just a interesting take on worker placement and action selection, right?
Well, yeah, it's got a single worker, and in that regard, I guess I wouldn't even call it a worker placement game. I feel like it is more an action selection game. It works in a very similar way that the Gallerist does, where you have one worker, and it can travel to multiple areas, and whatever area it goes onto, it does that action that's printed on the area. The difference between the Gallerist and this is that the map of different actions grows and grows and grows with each subsequent turn, and it becomes this huge sprawling thing at the end of the game that you have to navigate because you can only go in a particular sequence, so you can only go to areas that are adjacent to you, and you can also only go on areas that you can actually fulfill. If they say, hey, this area will build you a house, well, you have to have the resources to actually be able to build that house to go in that area. And if that area is the barricade for the action that you actually want to do, well, then you'll have to be able to get there and build the thing that you need to do. When the game starts out, it's just this little map of little areas, and you move your colonist guy 3 times, and he'll do the things, and it's pretty simple, but as the map grows and grows and grows, it becomes progressively more complicated till you're drowning in a sea of action spots.
Yeah, because you move your pawn 3 times to adjacent hexes, but there are also these market spots all over the board that are kind of like double hexes, or are they triple hexes? Either way, they're bigger, and you can teleport to any of them, and then work your way from there. So, yeah, at the beginning of the game, your options they're not small, but they're reasonable. But as this thing gets bigger and bigger, and the way you can jump to new market spots, just your actions explode. I mean, so I played the 3-era game, and the way the game appears to be structured is it does ramp you in. Like, the first era is almost like an extended setup. You start with almost nothing in front of you, and your little, you're doing this action selection out on the main board, and it kind of also has combo play, like Efka, like you were saying. If you can only go to a spot, if you can do the stuff, and you do 3 moves on a turn, so you get that satisfying like endorphin hit when you move one place, get the thing, move to a second place, use the thing to turn it into a new thing, and then move a third time to finalize that little combo turn and do something really cool. Like sometimes you have the ability to do that, but you also have straight up engine building on your player tableau in front of you. Just you make buildings that make you wood every single round, and you can make buildings that make you food every single round, and it seems like in the beginning of the game, that's all you really were doing. It's like the first era is just getting a mediocre engine going. Like like by the end of this first era, which for us took like an hour and a half, and for you guys probably took a lot longer. All I was really making was food and bricks and wood, and I used that bricks and wood to make more things that made brick and wood. Like the things I was making was not very interesting. And I've actually heard that, when you can also play this game where you just fast track, don't even really play the first era, just get a certain number of action points to spend immediately to kind of set up your zone and jump you into the second era where things start to get a little bit more interesting. And we played the 3 eras. So when we got to the third era, like the new hexes that were coming out definitely did significantly more interesting stuff. Like I think there was a building that you could build that would let you move your pawn twice. Is that right, Efka?
Yeah, there is. And there are also these embassies, which are kind of like tech trees that you can buy yourself into. And what's really cool about the Colonists is that each time you play it, it's going to be a different game because it will depend on what embassies come out. So you will have 4 for eras 1 and 2, and at the start of era 3 you'll get a 5th one, but there are 9 total possible ones. And they feel kind of like the thing in Marco Polo, where you have really cool, awesome game-breaking abilities that you can buy yourself into, and anyone can do any of them. It doesn't matter, and you can chain combinations of them if you want to. That's where the variety of the game really came through for me. And what I was disappointed with, however, was, I think, the engine building part. And this might be just my personal experience of that one game, that one mega uber long game that we played. But like you said, as you're playing the game, you're hoping for that engine building element that you've been working for hours and hours and hours, and going through era 1, which isn't very particularly interesting. You're just building a farm, and that farm will make wood, and with that wood you'll buy another farm. Yeah. And then you'll make wood again. And you're hoping for something to develop. And actually, what happened in our game, somewhere through era 3, my entire engine collapsed because...
And this is like 6 hours in for you?
Yeah, this is 6 hours in, right? And I think the reason it collapsed was because I wasn't that experienced with the game. I built that engine to last about 3 eras. And then, like a really bad... watering can, like a really old one that you find in the shed, eventually all the gaps in it will start leaking and the thing will just fall apart. And that's what happened to my engine. It had gaps, and I found myself trying to desperately plug them through era 3. So that's all I was doing effectively in era 3, in the hopes that in era 4 I might actually catch up, and with all those gaps covered up I can actually build that final bit of the engine and make it complete. But what I found really disappointing in Era 4 was that everything that I worked towards to wasn't very interesting. It was just like,
really?
Yeah, okay, so what can I buy? Well, I want some red buildings, so I can send my red workers, and the red workers are the best workers. If you send a red worker into a building, it'll give you a lot of points as long as it's there at the end of the game. And you can feed it, meaning it needs some clothes and food and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you feed it clothing. And once it's eaten its clothes, it'll give you points. And I was like, so what can I build? Okay, well, I can build a casino. And what will the casino do? The casino will give me more victory points. Uh-huh. Okay.
So points are good, but they're not always that interesting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Has this been what I was working for 11 hours for, just like at the end of the game, I'll get even more victory points. Yes.
Were there that many like interesting buildings that let you like change, like what, for instance, the stables that came out in Era 3 that let you move your envoy twice?
Yes.
To jump over a spot you don't want to. Other cool build. I didn't play the 4th era. I have no idea what's in there.
And the reason I brought up embassies at that point was because there was an embassy that let me do that anyway. So it was a tech tree that let me jump over action spots, and I didn't need to build the stables because there was no point to it. And the thing was, we found that in Era 3, because of how buildings come out, so you never know what new actions are going to appear, because for each era they're randomized. So one action in one game might come out at the very start of the era, whereas in a different game it might come right out at the very end. And basically we never got the ability to build houses until I think like the latter part of Era 3. And houses are like the best houses that you can get in this game. You start with really bad houses, like the ones in England, and then you work up towards better ones. And I just really wanted to get those red houses because they give you the red workers, and the red workers are the best. And we got them right at the end of Era 3. And then I felt like, well, okay, I only have time to build a couple of these red buildings where I can send my red workers to and get the best things. But the best thing I can build, despite some of them being a little interesting, was just something that gave me more victory points because, hey, at the end of the day, it is a Euro game, so in a Euro game, you need victory points to win. But,
right.
But it didn't... you played... you reviewed a game called Oh My Goods, and you found it very unsatisfying with its original rules that the engine that you build and work towards to for about 20 minutes doesn't quite, do that full engine revolution and, produces the awesome thing. That's how I felt about the Colonists on my first playthrough, but it was 11 hours long.
Yeah, that's way too long.
Yeah. It really is.
A couple things. The first thing, just for a little more context for people listening, when you're moving your little envoy around the map, you're doing these little chains, and that's cool. But there is a bit of player interaction here because if you want to go on a spot that somebody else's pawn is on, you have to pay them a penalty. Like you give them tools and tools plus food or something else. I can't remember exactly, but either way, you're giving them resources that you need to do stuff, and they're going to be happy to take those things. So there is definitely some player. That's actually the majority of the player interaction in this game is just having people be in the way where you want to be, and is it worth it for you to spend these resources to actually go there? So having that tech tree, like you said, or the stables building that lets you jump over is pretty powerful in that respect. Another thing to mention, so I played the 3-player game. A 3-era game. It was also 3 players, and so I was trying to win the game, and so we got into the 3rd era, and I could start to see the kind of stuff that was out there, and I decided not to try and get the red-colored workers. So there's 3 color workers. There's greens, yellows, and reds. Is that correct? Yeah, and I was happy with... The greens are the worst, and I was happy with just teching to the yellow level and trying to do well there. If we had played a 4-era game, I would have lost badly because I built myself up to do well in that 3rd era. And essentially, in front of you, you have this grid of spots that you can put buildings down into. And what is it, like 6x6? Something like that?
Yeah, probably.
About something like that. In the beginning of the game, I remember thinking, how the heck am I going to fill all of these spots? Like, this thing is...
Easy.
Like, that's a lot. And then by the 3rd era, I crammed it full. And what I did is I had, I think, 7 theaters. And theater is like the casino. It just makes you points every time you run your engine. And you run your engine every other turn. And every one of these eras is, I think, 6 turns long. Is that true? Or I guess 6 seasons long?
It's 5 years long.
Yeah, so you're going to take 10 to 12 turns in every one of these 4 eras, which is part of the reason the game can go so long. And at the end of every other one of these, you make stuff. So I won by just producing a bunch of coins, which are victory points, with these theaters, and that was an engine, and it was pretty uninteresting. And I remember thinking, well, I look forward to playing this with the 4th era to see more interesting stuff that I could do. I guess I didn't realize they just have... Let me guess, the casino makes 3 points?
Yes, correct.
Turn?
Yes.
Yeah. Because the theaters make 2, and in era 1, you can make a pub, and, guess what? It makes 1 victory point a turn.
Exactly.
There's lots of stuff that makes... there are lots of resources in this game. We don't want to, simplify it to just say, oh, all you do is make things that produce you victory points at the end. It's a bit fiddly and cluttery, and actually, this also leads me into a better answer for your question earlier. Yes, I think there is a style of Euro games that do fit this really long, complicated setting, and that's the splatter games. You have, like, Antiquity is something that comes into my mind of a game with just a million little chits. You almost need tweezers to pick and move them around on the map because they're just so tiny and there's so many of them. And in the Colonists, the bits are not that tiny, but there are a lot of them. Like, I found that the engine building part, like when you run your engine and you make all your wood and you make your brick and all that, like, it could take like several minutes of jostling around because you also have a limited amount of storage, which is a really important part of this game, right? You can only store a certain amount of stuff. And so if you want to build things, you better, and then if you want to build a thing that takes 6 resources, you better make sure you have a storage space of at least 6 spots. And you probably will at that point, but you're just jostling, like, what resources are in my storage and what resources am I leaving just on the buildings that are making it for the moment until I get to it. You have these, you're starting to make these big stacks of little wood chits and brick chits and clay and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, of course, you are trying to make victory points, but there are a lot of resources you're juggling in this one.
But that's all the game does. There are different resources, but at the end of each era, you just kind of figure out what's going to come in the next era. Well, it's a building that's going to make this new resource that you didn't have before, that you will desperately need and want to get, but it's a little bit harder to make than the previous resources you had. Because if you had wood before in era 1, and wood is easy to make because you just build a building that builds a wood, well, in this next era, you'll get iron, and iron is harder to make because you'll need to get iron ore, and ore is harder to get than wood, and then you'll need to convert it, and to convert it you'll need to get this other resource which is called coal, and you'll need this iron because if you want to actually score points, you'll need to build buildings, and those buildings need you to have iron. And I found that all the game does is it just gets progressively more complicated, but not necessarily more interesting. And so here's my thing. I actually think The Colonists isn't a bad game. I just don't think it's a game that's meant to be played from eras 1 to 4. And I think the fact that originally, when they designed this game, they had 8 eras in it, apparently, so it was going to be twice as long as it already is, which just sounds completely stupendous. I think the game is meant to be played a couple of eras at a time, and you start with era 1 and 2, you play that once and you go, I understand, then you play era 2 and 3, 2 and 3, 2 and 3. Okay, I'm done with 2 and 3, I'm going to play 3 and 4 now, because that's the more complicated part. But I don't think you're meant to go through this whole era 1 to 4 epic Twilight Imperium, but a Euro, like an Uwe Rosenberg Euro style kind of game.
Right.
It doesn't work. It falls apart, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just for a certain subset of people, they are going to enjoy that 1 to 4 era thing. And I think those subset of people are probably not prone to analysis paralysis. Yes, I can be, and it sounds like this one broke your brain at certain points. But as I also mentioned before, there are ways in the rulebook, I have not read them, but I've heard, that you can like jumpstart, like you were just saying. Like you could start in era 2 or start in era 3. There's also a flip side to all of these player boards that, from what I've heard, is like a very fast version of the game that's like a 90-minute game where you actually start with some buildings pre-printed on the board itself. You have a smaller area, and I think you only play eras 1 to 2. So like on one hand, I think that's cool to have that option, but on the other hand, eras 1 and 2 are the lame ones.
Yeah.
They're like, like thematically, if you're like building a house, like eras 1 is digging the hole, and era 2 is laying down the cement foundation. And era 4, you're like, like hammering photos to your wall and buying plasma screen TVs. But the first couple are.
I disagree with that analogy because I think era 4, you're just laying more cement, but it's better cement that was more expensive to get, that you earned with your really high paying job that you worked at for decades to get to. But the cement is better.
So you didn't really feel like you had a house at the end?
No, I just felt like I had a lot of cement.
House.
Yeah. And that's fine. Do you know what? As far as Uwe games go, and I know this isn't an Uwe game, but this feels so much like an Uwe game. First of all, Clemens Franz artwork, so that's Uwe, kind of stereotype right there. And It is so similar to them, and honestly, I think some of the things it does better than Uwe ever did. There, said it.
And this is also a first-time designer. So
Yes.
wow.
Yeah.
Talk about not starting small. But anyway, I think to wrap it up, like my super simple impression is I had fun. I played it for 4.5 hours, and I felt like I played it for about an hour longer than I wanted to. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to playing a modified, smaller version of this one in the future, like hopefully like a 3.5 hour experience. And it sounds like you might be in a similar boat.
Yeah, there's one slight thing that I want to broach before we put away the Colonists on the bookshelf and don't touch it for a couple of years. That's the flavor text on the cards, and I found that
a little weird, isn't it?
It's quite weird. So first of all, the yo dog thing, where you were playing a game about medieval times and colonizing things and farmers and wood, and yo dog is not necessarily the most appropriate flavor text, but that's not even my problem. And my problem was a card. I don't quite remember its name, but it was something to do with a cottage, because it was called something cottage or cottage something, but cottage was the key word. Now, for those of you who are not British, cottaging is a derogatory slang term for a sexual activity between two men. And the way the card depicted itself was very much indicative that it was referencing that derogatory slang term. And we just looked at it and went, what is it even doing in this game?
That is a little weird.
We were completely baffled by it, and it felt so out of place and so unnecessary and so backwards that it just doesn't need to be in a board game. Why is a board game in 2016 doing this? But it's the fact that it's the same two publishers that brought Grand Austria Hotel last year, and last year Grand Austria Hotel had a slur against Scottish people, implying that they're very stingy, which we thought, okay, that's not so great. But now there's things like that, and I'm just not very comfortable with it.
It almost makes me feel like, there are so many things in this box. Like, if you're a publisher trying to make this game, you're going to have to sub this out to several people, I think. It almost feels like somebody was given the role of the flavor text. Like, that person probably knew this, but it feels like they didn't know the setting of the game, because, it was very modern, like, tongue-in-cheek, trying to be funny but usually failing type of flavor text, for a card with like a shovel, like, dig a pit, kind of like thing. And maybe there just wasn't any oversight here. Maybe one person just took care of it all and said, okay, it's done. And the publisher was like, oh, thank God somebody did that part. Okay, let's finish this game, get it to print. I don't know. It doesn't, I'm not like thoroughly offended to my core, but I'm definitely kind of weirded out. It's like, it's tone deaf to have that specific one. I didn't see that one. Also, I wouldn't have got it because I'm not British and I've never heard of that term before, but I Googled it and Efka is not crazy. It's a real thing.
We told you not to Google it, but you did it anyway.
I did it anyway.
Yeah.
So, weird flavor text, but that's just a tiny little bump on this otherwise humongous Euro-y style game. Like, what is with that text? Anyway.
I had fun. Can I just say that?
You can say that.
Playing the Colonists, intermittently, I had fun. And sometimes a lot of fun, wanting to see how the engine comes together. It's just that wasn't consistent, and it was very long.
Speaking of games that are fun, I played Adrenaline for the first time 2 days ago. And this is a very different experience than the Colonists, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
The theme of this one, as I was told, was this is a Euro-style first-person shooter game, like video game with Doom or Quake or that kind of thing. And I have now played it, and my personal opinion is it did not feel very Euro-y. It felt very first-person shooter-y, though. Like, from a thematic perspective, I think the theme really came across, because you are a figurine, a really nice little miniature figurine on the board, really cool colors. I was like the bright purple one. And you're running around in this very tiny map. You're picking up all sorts of really cool looking guns, and you are shooting each other. I guess not everything is a gun. I picked up a sledgehammer, and I smashed some people with sledgehammers, and just hitting people back and forth. And the Euro-y aspect, I guess, comes in when somebody dies. They take too much damage, and then you evaluate who did the most damage to that person, and that person gets the most points. And then you also get a little bonus if you're the first person to damage the person who just died. And then you just keep going. You're just constantly just running around, picking up ammo, shooting your guns, picking up new guns, shooting each other, getting shot at, and I had fun. It was like an hour or so long game. There was 4 of us. But I feel like the Euro-y part was oversold to me. Like, I get that area control is a quote-unquote Euro-y type mechanism. And I also understand that there was very little randomness in the game. But I guess it was so thematic and so beautiful and really felt like I was running around shooting people that... what was your opinion of the game?
So the 2 ways they sell it as in Euro is, first they say, hey, it's an area control game, but it's an area control game where your area moves away from you and you desperately want to shoot it. And B, it's a resource management game, except the resources are ammo and you use them to shoot your area. And I quite enjoyed Adrenaline. I played it a couple of times. The first time I played it was at UK Games Expo, where, and disclaimer, I worked for CGE at UK Games Expo demoing Adrenaline. So just before we go any further, that has to be said. I actually got legitimately paid money to help them demo it to other people. So there. Anyway, so I played it first at Expo in its prototype form, and the prototype form is pretty much almost the same as the game as it came out, except the game added a couple of extra modes like the turret mode, which I haven't played actually.
We just played the straight deathmatch, which sounds like the standard one.
Yeah, but I really had fun with Adrenaline. It's just that, ironically, the same as the Colonists, I felt like the fun was intermittent and the game was too long. And
interesting.
The game isn't that long, really. It's, about an hour or something like that?
Yeah, it was about an hour for me, so it didn't feel long to me at all.
I wish it was a 45-minute game, which I know, 15 minutes here or there, right? We're not talking 2 hours in one direction or another, but I felt if they could have even shaved even more time off of Adrenaline, it would have been so much more punchier and has such cool moments as you watch the 2 players that are in turn just behind you. One of them picks something up like a chainsaw and moves into a certain location, and the other one does something and you go, I understand what they're doing. It's all coming together for me now, and I see what's about to happen, and yeah, I'm dead. I am dead. And you just watch players do things and you understand where it's going. And it's like watching a first-person shooter in slow-mo and the bullet is racing across the screen and the end point is you. Yeah. I love those moments in Adrenaline. They're pretty great. But I also wouldn't call it a Euro because to me, and actually I played this a little bit with Shut Up and Sit Down at Expo, and I said to Paul Dean, hey, doesn't this feel like Wiz War, but a Eurogame version, like a less random version? And he said, actually, yeah, that's the perfect analogy. And I don't know if you ever played Wiz War, but it is
I have no experience with it, actually.
Manically running around and trying to kill the other players. But this is a version where you have to manage your resources more, and you have that area control element. And it's not random. You can, plan things and they will come to fruition unless someone kills you before that and you have to go somewhere else. But that isn't even such a big deal. It
really isn't, yeah.
Yeah, you just respawn somewhere else and you get to do another thing, which is totally cool. It's just that with a game called Adrenaline, and it's meant to be a first-person shooter, you always feel like, I really want this to go to 11. And it goes to about 8, which is also fine. But it's not as great as 11.
Well, it's interesting. When I was playing it, a friend of mine, we played it at a big old board game day to celebrate my birthday. Yay, I love board game days. And a friend came over while we were playing it, and he saw it was Adrenaline. He's like, oh, so this is a real-time game, huh? And we said, no, actually, no, it's not. And he's like, oh, well, it's called Adrenaline. So the idea, there's one more mechanic. This is not a very complicated game, but there's one more mechanic in the game where the name comes from, adrenaline, and that is that as you take more damage, as your health meter fills up, you actually unlock better actions for yourself. So it's actually kind of nice getting shot up.
Yeah.
Like if you don't take enough damage, sometimes you almost feel too weak. It's actually it's wonderful when you get just enough damage to unlock the best and final action that lets you move and then shoot, which is a rare thing in the game. So that I think that there's the thematic idea there. Like your adrenaline is pumping as you're getting shot more, and the more damaged you are, the more powerful and scary you are. That's all cool, but I will admit, from a thematic perspective and from an energy perspective, I never really felt the adrenaline bit. Like there were a couple times where having that extra action allowed me to do a really cool turn. Like thankfully, okay, I've taken enough damage, I can move twice and then pick up a thing as opposed to just moving once and picking up a thing. But I never really found myself like, oh, please shoot me, because these abilities are so great. Like I feel like in order to get that kind of energy going, the extra abilities almost needed to be even better than they were. Like they were just like a nice upgrade, but they did not seem like, oh yeah, this is awesome. Oh, I'm so glad I get this. Oh no, you killed me. Oh, I'm so upset because I had that amazing thing. That didn't really come across, and I'm glad it wasn't a real-time game, because in general I don't like real-time games as much. But I guess what you were saying about the seeing a first-person shooter happen in slow-mo, that really is what is happening here. And the game end clock is just the number of times people have been killed. So it's really easy to make the game a 45-minute game, I think. You just
it is. You
play
can
the game to less deaths, and that might imbalance it to a certain degree. I don't really know, but it's easy to shorten the game, because really you're just doing the same thing over and over until the timer goes beep. So yeah, I look forward to playing it again. I really enjoyed the variety of guns. Like there are so many different weapons in the game and that's where the variety seemed to come into play for me.
And they all do a cool thing. What I really enjoyed in Adrenaline, I enjoyed a couple more things actually, and I really liked it for that, was that it brings up a very interesting discussion across the table. Because you don't mind being damaged personally, it's not whether someone damages you that's important. It's who gets damaged that's important. So you're constantly trying to goad other players into trying to damage the person you want to be damaged, or maybe try and get someone to not damage who you want to not damage so you can kill them yourself or whatever. You constantly have goals and objectives in Adrenaline, and you're constantly trying to negotiate with other players, just verbally. Hey, let's do this, because this is good for you and good for me, and we can get something out of it. And it never feels personal. There's never like this feeling like, oh, you're just going to hurt me. No, everyone kind of plays for themselves. They have their own goals and their own objectives. And sometimes simply those objectives align with other players, and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's really cool. The second thing that I think is really important to mention about Adrenaline is that it's very original. And look, it's just a thing that CG does. It never does the same thing twice. It always goes into a different area or genre of board games that is just unique in some way. And we maybe never have been expecting a first-person shooter game from CG, but at the same time, we were never expecting a word party game from CG last year either. And
true.
Look how that's done.
Pretty big deal, yeah.
Yeah.
Going off to the negotiation style that you were saying, this game did make good moments. Like, I don't want to imply that it was lame or anything like that when I say the adrenaline didn't make the energy happen. There were some really great moments. In fact, our game ended, or we initiated the end game by me killing my friend Evan. And I was able to do it just barely. Like, I had to do like 6 damage to him, which is a lot in one turn. And I was able to just barely do it because he was in just the right perfect spot. And so it's my turn. I say, all right, I'm killing you, Evan. And he screams, he's like, no, you're the only person I don't want to kill me. Like, it's a weird moment. Like, it's not like, no, I don't want to die. It's just like, no, anybody else killing me is totally fine, just not you. And I was the start player? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was the start player.
Yeah.
So because of that initiated the final round, which is like a final frenzy thing. Everybody got one more turn, and it was over. And I came in second place, so I didn't actually win with that play. And it could be a little hard to tell who is actually winning in one way or another.
I had no idea.
I felt like I was in a strong position. I felt like I was doing I wasn't doing a great job of killing people, because there's a bit of an area majority for who killed the most people at the end of the game. I wasn't killing people there very well, but I was doing a good job of just spreading my damage around, so it's just kind of getting points constantly. But it also seems like, well, the person who won off the back of killing people the best. Like they got the most victory points for that. I think the ending scores, I think they were in the late 30s maybe, or they were maybe in the 50s. I don't really remember, but the spread was about 7-ish points between the first player and the last player in a 4-player game. And the person who kills most people gets 8 points, and the person who kills the second most people gets 6 points, and etc., falling down. And that's... We figured out if things had gone slightly differently, I probably still wouldn't have won, but it would have been closer. But either way, really good moments, and just a really pretty, unique-looking game on the table. I totally agree.
Adrenaline is one of the better releases of the year, just because it does something different. It is consistently fun, even though only intermittently fun.
Speaking of intermittently fun, you have played a game called Don't Mess with Cthulhu, and I have not. And you have something to say about it.
Okay, John, tell me how much you like social deduction games.
I loathe them. They are one of my least favorite games, yes.
I know. That's why we're talking about social deduction games.
So tell me more about this game that I'll hate.
Okay, so here's the thing. Don't Mess with Cthulhu is a very little game from Indie Boards and Cards that was on Kickstarter earlier in the year. If you hear rattling as I'm talking, it's because I'm holding a copy in my hands, which you can't see because this is a podcast, an audio medium, not a video one.
We make YouTube videos. We're used to pointing things at cameras.
Exactly, right? And I'm holding this as if you can see it. But anyway, so Don't Mess with Cthulhu is a very little game of social deduction. And when I say little, it's not just little in box size, it's little in scope as well. Meaning a game can last about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most, but that's about it. And it gives you that social deduction feeling like the Resistance does or Werewolf does, but in a small amount. I guess Werewolf is an even shorter game.
Well, One Night Ultimate Werewolf is. The original one, I don't know, I've seen some screaming matches go on for quite a while with that one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this is a pretty short one, and it also feels very gateway. You could teach it to non-gamers super easy, and whilst One Night Ultimate Werewolf could feel like a bit of information overload in terms of, so what do all these roles do? Like, I don't even understand. I'm just going to play. That's how new people feel with One Night Ultimate Werewolf. Whereas Don't Mess with Cthulhu is pretty simple because all you do is you flip a card open and see what's underneath it. That's literally the game. You flip a card and you see whether you flipped a good card or a bad card. And there is a card that says immediately you lose the game, in which case the game ends and you just play again. So the way it works is you get secret roles. Some of you will be investigators, and some of you will be cultists. And there are a number of Elder Sign cards in the deck. There's a whole bunch of cards that do just nothing. There's some Elder Signs, and there's one Cthulhu card. So if you're an investigator, your objective is to flip over all the Elder Sign cards. And if you are a cultist, your objective is to either by the game end to not have the investigators flip up all the Elder Sign cards, or just flip up a Cthulhu card. And that's it. But the tricky thing is, each round you're going to be dealt some cards. You're going to look at all your cards that you've got, and then you're going to shuffle them without looking them and display them across the table, and then people will be able to pick the cards that are in front of you. But here's the thing, you don't know exactly which card is which, but you do know which cards you have, and you are allowed to say which cards you have. But people might not believe you because you might be lying, because you might be of a different faction, or so you might be a cultist and you might not have Cthulhu, so you might say, hey, I have Cthulhu, don't pick me, with the entire intention that they don't pick you and pick someone else where they might actually flip Cthulhu open. I know that sounds convoluted.
No, I get it. You're like playing the odds, right? You're like, I certainly don't have it. It's a higher likelihood of me winning if they go randomly over there as opposed to over near me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the game. And each round you play, you have less and less cards because at the end of the round, all the cards that haven't been flipped open get put together, shuffled up, distributed across all players again. And so you keep going until there are very few cards remaining and all the Elder Signs have been flipped or not. And that's it. And it feels a little random, obviously, because it is just flip a card and see what's underneath it, and it could be anything. But that's kind of part of the charm of the game. It just works at what it does, but I would say it works best with people who are new to social deduction games or new to board games in general. There wasn't enough meat in Don't Mess with Cthulhu for me. And here's the kicker. So there's a whole bunch of like little mini expansions for this game that are not available in the retail version because they came as Kickstarter stretch goals. But you can't buy them unless you go to a convention, which just feels very bizarre.
How necessary are they to have fun with the game, though?
Well, I think for me personally, whilst I did enjoy Don't Mess with Cthulhu, it's a nice little puzzle that doesn't outstay its welcome, but it gets stale as you keep doing the same thing over and over again. So you might want to play it a couple of times and then you're just kind of done, and you want a little bit more out of that game. And I feel like they are necessary for me, who's someone who's been playing games for a while, if that makes sense.
That makes sense. I mean, as I mentioned before, I really dislike this style of game in general. It just comes down to me. I don't like lying. I don't like, trying to come up with a false argument for why the reality is not the reality of the situation. Like if I'm the traitor or the cultist, I don't like trying to, on the fly, accuse other people of a thing that I know is certainly not true. However, if this game is only like 10 to 15 minutes long, I think it would keep the pain somewhat quick for me. I think if I ended up having to play it, it would not be that big of a deal versus other social deduction games like, The Resistance and Secret Hitler and those styles that can go longer. And I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thing for me because I love bluffing in games, but I hate lying. And
you do lie a lot in this. You lie even if you are... So generally in social deduction games, you have like either the goodies or the baddies, right? You have the majority, which are kind of like the goodies, and the minority, which are the baddies. So the baddies never want to reveal themselves. In Don't Mess with Cthulhu, even though there's a clear majority of investigators, you don't necessarily want to reveal to people that you are an investigator, because the number of cultists can also vary. So you could have one cultist or two. So you want to keep your cards hidden until the last possible moment as to who you are, but at the same time, you still want to make those alliances with the right people. So it does have that interesting dynamic in what is a very short game.
Are you wanting to play it again?
Yeah, but I managed to pick up the expansion stuff from the Kickstarter campaign at Essenspiel, and I haven't had the chance to play with them yet. And I'm actually really quite dying to try the game with all that new stuff in it. That actually gets me waking up in the morning and thinking, life's worth living, because any day now I could play Don't Mess with Cthulhu with all the stuff in it that I haven't played with yet.
Well, just think about it this way. Next time you bust out the Colonists, just start with a game of Don't Mess with Cthulhu first to really get you in the mindset of like, one game can be really short and one game can be really long.
And then just don't play the Colonists. Or...
Or I suppose that is always an option.
Or play just 2 eras of the Colonists, which is what a sane person would do.
Maybe with only 2 people as well.
Yeah, or 3 I think is also fine. Oh, talking of player count, actually, don't play Adrenaline with 5 players. It drags on.
It plays up to 5?
Yeah, it does go up to 5. It's free to 5, and the 5 player is too long. And that has been the second episode of the Last Place podcast. I hope you've been enjoying our sultry voices as much as we have been enjoying talking to you. You can follow us on Twitter things like No Pun Included for me, or John Gets Games for John. You can subscribe to our YouTube channels and keep listening to us, and we'll keep delivering this goodness to you.
Indeed. Have a good night or day or wherever it is you're listening to this, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.